Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I've spent the last 15 years researching something that most people try to forget or avoid altogether. True hauntings. Not Hollywood stories. Not ghost tales made up to scare children. But real accounts from real people. People who lived through something they couldn't explain. Tonight, I'm going to tell you three stories. Three stories that happened right here in America. In homes just like yours. On streets you might have walked. These are stories that authorities investigated. Stories backed by historical records. Stories that, causes, remain unexplained to this day. The question isn't whether ghosts exist. The question is, what happens when they decide to make themselves known? So turn off your phones, lock your doors, and listen carefully. Because once you know these stories, you'll never forget them. Chuang-I, the Belwish, Tennessee, 1817. Our first story takes us back to 1817. Tennessee, a place that was still frontier country, barely tame, barely civilized. On a small farm outside Adams, Tennessee, there lived a man named John Bell. He had a wife, Catherine, 7 children, and what he believed was a good, honest life. But on a cold December night, that life ended. It started with sounds. First, just scratching on the walls, clawing, like something trapped inside the cabin wanted to get out. Catherine Bell thought it was a rat in the walls. John Bell went to check, found nothing. But the sounds got worse. By the second week, the entire family was hearing it scratching, gnawing, the distinct sound of something heavy dragging across the floors at night. John Bell's neighbors came to help. They searched every inch of that house. They tore open walls. They dug under the floorboards. Nothing. What they found instead was something far worse. The sounds escalated. Soon, family members reported feeling cold hands, invisible hands touching them in the dark. Catherine Bell described it as a presence so heavy, so real, that when it touched her skin, it felt like ice. Then came the voices. The Bell family's eldest daughter, Betsy, was the first to really hear it. She was 13 years old. She described the voice as high-pitched, raspy, like no human voice she ever heard. It spoke her name, just whispered it, over and over, in the darkness. Beastie, beastie. Within weeks, the entire household was under siege. The entity which locals began calling the Bell, which was relentless. It followed Betsy everywhere, into her room at night, to school during the day. The other children in her class reported hearing the scratching sounds in the walls around her. But it wasn't just sounds anymore. The thing started to hurt her. Betsy's skin would develop mysterious scratches, deep welts that appeared out of nowhere, as if scratched by an invisible hand. Her hair would be pulled, sometimes so violently that it would lift her entire body off the ground. Doctors from Nashville came. They examined her. They found no explanation. One physician wrote in his journal, "The condition appears to defy all known science. The scratches appear simultaneously on multiple parts of her body in seconds, something no human hand could accomplish. And the girl shows no signs of causing these injuries herself." Entity began speaking in full sentences. It had opinions, it had preferences, and it had a particular obsession with Betsy Bell. Hundreds of people visited the Bell home over the next 3 years. Ministers, scientists, skeptics, all of them left bewildered. The witch, whatever it was, would recite Bible verses backwards. It would hum hymns in a voice that sounded like it was coming from inside the walls themselves. It would describe events that would happen the next day, and those events would happen exactly as it predicted. And through it all, Betsy Bell suffered. The final entry in one priest's journal reads, "I have seen the girl levitate 3 feet off her bed. I have heard voices speaking in multiple languages, including languages none of these people have ever studied. I have prayed continuously, but my prayers have had no effect. Whatever this entity is, it is not bound by the laws of God or man." Then, one day, it stopped. As suddenly and mysteriously as it began, the haunting ended. The entity was gone. The house fell silent. Betsy Bell lived the rest of her life as a normal woman. She married, had children, grew old, but she never spoke about what happened during those 3 years. Not once. When she was in her 60s, a reporter tried to interview her. She refused. She said only, "Some things should not be remembered." And Betsy Bell died. She took the answer with her. To this day, no one knows what the Bell Witch was. or why it chose the Bell family. But in Tennessee, people still talk about it. And on quiet nights, residents of Adams say they can still hear it, that high-pitched voice, whispering through the darkness. Beastie, beastie. Shuang Roman 2, Amityville Horror, New York, 1974, 30 miles east of New York City. There's a small town called Amityville. On November 13, 1974, something happened there that the police would call the most brutal tragedy we've ever witnessed. Arnold DeFeo Jr., a man in his 20s, walked into the local police station and confessed to murdering his entire family, his parents and 4 siblings, while they slept. 6 bodies, all shot in the back of the head. When investigators asked him why he did it, his answer was simple: "They made me do it." But Ronald DeFeo was alone in that house. No one else was there. No one could have made him do anything. He was convicted and imprisoned for life. 1 year later, a family named Lutz moved into that same house. Same house where 6 people had been murdered. The real estate agent didn't mention the murders to them. George and Kathleen Lutz, with their 3 children, moved in on January 18, 1975. Within 72 hours, they called the Catholic Church. What followed was documented, investigated, and verified by countless people: priests, psychologists, police officers, paranormal investigators. Here's what they reported. George Lutz said that on the second night, he woke up at 3:15 a.m. to the sound of Martian boots. Heavy, military-style footsteps walking through the house. He got up to investigate. There was no one there. The footsteps came every night. Same time, same pattern, always at 3:15 a.m. But that wasn't the worst part. The family reported seeing shadows that moved independently from any light source, shadows that had substance. When family members tried to touch these shadows, they felt ice-cold air, not just cold, but actively hostile. Kathleen Lutz reported being violently pushed out of bed by something invisible. She woke up on the floor with bruises on her arms, bruises in the shape of hands. Not her hands, someone else's hands. The children reported seeing a demonic face in the bedroom, described as having red, glowing eyes and a mouth that opened impossibly wide. But most disturbing were the windows. A window in the basement would open repeatedly, even after being nailed shut. And there was a smell, a sickly sweet stench that would emanate from that window. 2 local police officers who responded to the report went to the basement. They left immediately. One officer later said, "There was something in that basement. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't human, and it did not want us there." The Catholic Church sent a priest. In the bedroom, as he began to perform prayers of blessing, the priest's rectum suddenly gave out a tremendous blast of hot air and a terrible sound. He fled the house immediately. By February, 28 days after moving in, the family fled. They left everything behind. Furniture, clothes, photographs, just packed what they could carry and left. George and Kathleen Lutz were interviewed by dozens of journalists and investigators. Their story remained consistent. They showed no signs of fabrication. Everything they reported was meticulously documented. Some people claimed it was a hoax, but the Lutzes sold that house for less than market value and never spoke about the experience for profit. If it was a hoax, they gained nothing. The house still stands today in Amityville. Today's residents report nothing unusual. But ask anyone who lived there in 1975 what happened, and they'll tell you that house has something in it. Something that doesn't belong to this world. And some nights, when the temperature drops, when the wind is quiet, and when the house is dark, people swear they can still hear those footsteps. Heavy, methodical, purposeful, marching through the rooms at 3:15 a.m. Shuang Roman 3, Waverly Hills Sanatorium, Kentucky, 1910 to 1961, our last story, is perhaps the most heartbreaking. It takes us to Waverly Hills Sanatorium, on a hilltop outside Louisville, Kentucky. It was built in 1910 as a hospital facility dedicated to treating the most prevalent disease of that era, tuberculosis. In the early 1900s, tuberculosis was a death sentence. They called it consumption. It ate you from the inside out. Your lungs would deteriorate. You would cough up blood. You would slowly suffocate. There was no cure, no medicine that worked. Thousands of people desperate, dying people came to Waverly Hills hoping that the clean Kentucky air might save them. It didn't. Between 1910 and 1961, more than 60,000 people died at Waverly Hills. 60,000. The death toll was so high that the hospital staff became numb to it. Bodies were disposed of regularly, so regularly that they built what they called the body chute, a tunnel in the basement where corpses could be wheeled directly to waiting hearses, so that arriving patients wouldn't see the bodies of the dead being removed. Over 5 decades, Waverly Hills became less of a hospital and more of a tomb. And the patients didn't want to leave. When the hospital was eventually shut down and abandoned in 1961, paranormal investigators discovered something shocking. The place was still inhabited, not by the living, by the dead. Investigators reported seeing full-body apparitions walking through the hallways, patients in hospital gowns, translucent, moving as if they were still receiving treatment, doctors in spectral form, making rounds, checking on invisible patients. In the children's ward, investigators heard the sound of children playing, laughing, running, though no children were present. The laughter was described as sounding off, not quite natural, more like an echo of childhood than childhood itself. But the most disturbing phenomenon occurred in the body chute. Investigators who descended into the basement tunnel reported the temperature dropping dramatically. They felt a pressure described as almost physical pushing against them, as if something was actively resisting their presence. Several paranormal teams reported shadow figures moving through the tunnel. One investigator's thermal imaging camera captured what appeared to be a humanoid shape glowing red in the infrared, indicating an extreme heat signature standing in the middle of the body chute. When the investigator turned to look at it directly, it vanished. But the temperature remained cold. Impossibly cold. Medical records from Waverly Hills, preserved in the Kentucky State Archives, show something interesting. Multiple hospital staff members reported seeing a figure they called the Gray Nurse. It was described as a woman in her 50s, dressed in outdated nursing attire, appearing in various rooms at different times. Staff members reported that this nurse would check on patients, adjust their care, seem to comfort the dying, but no one could find her name in any employment record. No one knew who she was. Then one day, a nurse recognized her from an old photograph, a photograph from 1934. And it was a nurse who looked exactly like the Gray Nurse. The nurse in the photograph had died of tuberculosis in 1945, right there in the hospital. She never left. She was still there, years after her death, still caring for patients who weren't there, still working in a hospital that no longer existed. Investigations have documented hundreds of incidents at Waverly Hills, doors opening and closing on their own, disembodied voices speaking patients' names, apparitions moving through the buildings, equipment turning on by itself in a place with no electricity. And in the basement, beneath that building, beneath that body chute, investigators have reported sensing a profound sadness, weight, the emotional residue of 60,000 people dying slowly, painfully, alone in a facility that had become less a place of healing and more a place of waiting for death. One investigator wrote, "Waverly Hills is not haunted. It's grieving. The entire structure seems to mourn not malevolently, but profoundly. The spirits there are not angry. They are simply staying. They cannot leave. They do not know how to leave. And perhaps, most tragically, they do not want to leave because leaving means finally accepting that they are dead." Waverly Hills still stands today. Most of it is boarded up, deteriorating, but paranormal groups continue to investigate. And they continue to document the same phenomena: the Gray Nurse, the ghostly patients, the overwhelming sense of sorrow that permeates every room. If you visit during the day, you might not notice anything unusual. The building is quiet, empty, just an old, abandoned structure slowly returning to nature. But at night, residents of Louisville still report seeing lights in the windows of Waverly Hills. Lights that shouldn't be there, in a building with no power. And on quiet nights, some say you can still hear them, the echoes of 60,000 people, still there, still dying, still grieving, unable to find their way to peace. The Gray Nurse is still making her round, and she's still waiting for morning, a morning that, for her, will never come. 3 true stories from American history that have never been fully explained. The bell which was never captured, never identified, never understood. The Amityville house still stands. People still live there. And some of them still report strange occurrences. Waverly Hills is still investigated, still mourned, still haunted, if we can call it that. These aren't stories meant to entertain you. They're not meant to scare you, though perhaps they do. They're meant to remind you of something very simple. We share this world with forces we don't understand, with phenomena that defy explanation, with the possibility that death is not an ending, but a continuation. So tonight, when you go to your homes, when you close your doors and turn off your lights, remember these stories, not to frighten yourself, but to remain open to the possibility that the world is far stranger, far more complex than we usually allow ourselves to believe. The supernatural isn't something that happens to other people, in other places, in other times. It happened right here, in America, to people just like you, and perhaps, pauses, still happening, in the walls of old houses, in abandoned buildings, in the spaces between living and dead. Thank you for listening, and please, lock your doors tonight.